Um, as you know, Hobbyzetics monthly Lunch and Learn series runs from the fall through the month of May. Occasionally, when a program is brought to us that has relevance, interest, and importance, we add a presentation in June. Today's program was suggested by Nancy Sugarman, who chairs OZ's Adult Education Committee and has a strong commitment to social justice. I've asked Nancy to introduce our speaker, our topic, and our speaker. So Nancy, over to you.
All right, thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm very excited to introduce Margaret. I first met her, I'm really the speaker. I first met her when I was volunteering with the Community Justice Center in Winooski, and Margaret was our leader, which was really a treat for me. She's also, I found out, currently on the board of the Clemens Family Farm in Charlotte, and I happen to know that she's traveled to faraway places. I don't know where else, but I know she went to like Australia or something. And this is what she says about herself. I call Mississippi home. I've lived and worked in several states. I have a PhD in English and taught at Vanderbilt and University of Iowa. In 2015, I retired after teaching for more than 20 years at St. Lawrence University, where my specialization was American and Caribbean literature. And I moved to Vermont in 2016, and we are very lucky to have her. So Margaret, welcome, and thank you for doing this for us. We look forward to hearing what
you for asking me. Thank you for asking me, Nancy. I hope we don't have any more phone rings. I don't know what's going on, but you know, stuff happens. I think what I really want to begin is with a series of questions, because these two holidays, I'll say with a question mark, obviously have occurred in the last few days. And so the question for me is, what are we celebrating, for whom, and who is the we doing the celebrating? And I got a chance to refresh my memory a bit about both holidays, and I'm gonna just begin with Loving Day. And the brief overview is that Richard and Mildred Loving were high school sweethearts, and as things happen, they got pregnant in 1958. They went to DC because they lived in Virginia. They went to DC to get married, and returned to Virginia with a marriage license, but miscegenation was illegal in Virginia, and at that time, 15 other states. And so the police raided their house with the hope that they would find them engaged in sexual relationships, but that didn't matter. They were still arrested and sentenced for violating the law. The sentence was suspended, but they were banned from Virginia, living in Virginia and their families for allegedly some 25 years, and they moved back to DC. And it was actually Mildred Loving who wrote the letter to Robert Kennedy saying, hey, we want to go home. We have the right to be married, blah, blah, blah. And so the rest is history. The Supreme Court decision came down my last year of high school and first year of college, 1967, and that the decision was unanimous that miscegenation, the laws against miscegenation, were unconstitutional. And what's really interesting is that the term itself, I understand, was coined anonymously in the United States. The term miscegenation was coined in the United States. A pamphlet appeared in the late 1800s on the streets of New York, and the pamphlet was entitled Miscegenation. And so it was defined at the time as marriage between a white person and to use the term of the day, a Negro. So it was a very, it wasn't all interracial marriage. It was specifically. And so it has become, since that time, a fairly celebrated holiday. However, I will say that this, like Juneteenth, is a fairly new national celebration for me as I think about it. And so I began to ask other African Americans about both holidays, both Loving Day and Juneteenth. And I got I spoke. I have a friend who is a native Vermonter who is the product of an interracial relationship, the product of a white mother and an African American father, and they identify as Black. And I remember that there were several, at this time every year, there would be a Facebook post. And I asked if I could read at least one of them for us to sort of think about in relation to Loving Day. And it's titled My Annual Loving Day Opposition and Rant. We celebrate Loving Day like it's something special. 52 years ago today, people were legally permitted to marry outside of their race. To this I say, we should have always experienced liberation that permitted us to marry outside of our race. To celebrate Loving Day is to celebrate something being given to us, or one that has always rightfully been ours as human beings, despite white people creating a system of oppression that prevented this from being so. To celebrate Loving Day for me is to function from a place of subjugation by being grateful and celebratory for something that has been our human right all along. To celebrate Loving Day is not progress, and is upholding the system of advantage by falsely and unconsciously giving power to the white supremacy construct created by white people. True love existed between races before the Lovings. White supremacy culture could not eradicate this, despite barbaric efforts to do so. Let's celebrate this human truth and uphold the power of love over feeding into white supremacy lies and power. And they go on to say that it is harm, the celebration of Loving Day to them as a product of an interracial relationship is hurtful. And so I have no opinion on that. I just put it out there for us to think about as we are considering this. In the context of my lifetime, this is a relatively and primarily through social media, though I think most of us knew, certainly I grew up at least part of my childhood in the Jim Crow South. So the anti-miscegenation laws were quite clear to me, but this case and this, to think about it as a landmark case and a celebratory moment is not the way in which I grew up thinking about it. And I'm still not sure. I think currently the popularity and celebration has morphed into, some would say co-opted, it has been co-opted by the LGBTQIA community. Love is love, right? And I'm also a member of that community. And so I'm uneasy. I think the popularity of Loving Day has spread because of that, rather than because of the initial reason for the constitutional, the Supreme Court decision in 1967. And again, I don't know what to think about that. I haven't come to any conclusions, but it is curious that Loving Day has become a celebration of love is love. And I think many of us will certainly agree that love is love. But I am concerned about that transition and what it means in relation to the meaning of that particular moment for Black people in the United States. Juneteenth, what I wondered is why, and especially in Mississippi, that's pretty close to Texas, and this is this is from a family deeply educated in African American history and culture, who read, who talked about the topics of the day. I never heard of Juneteenth. Maybe in the last 10 years, never. It meant that and so now that everything is always Juneteenth, and particularly in this context, it's a little dizzying. But what I learned is why I didn't know anything about it, and to just say that it's a celebration that always took place in Texas, and particularly in Galveston, Texas, because after the Emancipation Proclamation, and that the slaves were, quote, freed in other parts of the United States, nobody told Texas. And Texas had 250,000 slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation. And some 2 years after, June 19th, 1865, some folks from the Union Army went to Texas and said, hey, guess what? You know, the Emancipation Proclamation happened 2 years ago, and you've been enslaved for 2 years, and you shouldn't have been. That has become, Biden, of course, has made this a national holiday, and that has become, obviously, it has been a consistent reason for celebration in Texas, and particularly in the Galveston area. But what I learned is I couldn't figure out why I didn't know anything about it. And so what I learned is that my generation is the generation that knows least about Juneteenth celebrations for a couple of reasons. One was many of us and our parents were ashamed of the reality of slavery and didn't want to face it. And that the concentration at the time, and especially during the Jim Crow South, the concentration at the time was on upward mobility. And so to celebrate something connected with slavery was not something that folks wanted to do. It was also at the time of the Great Migration. And so it is not, because I was feeling really pretty awful about it, but it is not unusual or uncommon that someone of my generation, even from the Deep South, would have grown up with no real sense of what this thing called Juneteenth is. Again, and I certainly fully participate in all of the activities, but again, in sort of asking members, obviously much younger members of the African American community here in Vermont, what does it mean, and why do you do it? And one person said, you know, why would we celebrate Black people being duped for 2 years? What, you know, like, why are we celebrating the fact that 250,000 people were emancipated from chattel slavery 2 years after everybody else was emancipated. I have no idea. And I don't know, because this is all pretty new to me too. And I don't know what to think about it. But I do know that it's worth contemplating, as is why I am with you today. You know, why, you know, why are we here? And what is it that we want to know? And what are we going to do when we know what we know?
Margaret, do you want people to respond or ask questions in the chat? And then I can read them out or share them, or
Whatever you want to do. No, I'm happy to talk directly, or if you prefer the chat, that's fine too.
I love
Whatever
that
you
you
wanna do.
pose these questions. I think these are
Yeah,
great. I don't want to interrupt if you're.
but no. I mean,
Okay.
that's a stop, because I don't know. I don't have answers. I come to you with, you know, sort of information that's available to us, but I do have, I don't know what in this, and especially in our current racial context in this nation, right? I don't know what Juneteenth means in the context of a culture that in which we're still reeling from the murder of George Floyd. I don't know what I'm supposed to be. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, we have dismissed the myth of a post-racial America, right? And so the question for me is, in reality, in our current reality, what in Vermont, and let's leave it in Vermont, what is it that African Americans would be celebrating? And why? And I'm going to, Nancy asked me, and I was grateful for that as well, because of course, I had heard about Proposal 2, the changes to the Vermont Constitution. And of course, I mean, obviously, I'm going to vote yes, and I hope you will too, when you have the opportunity. But again, what does it mean to talk about changing the Vermont Constitution to abolish slavery? What comes to me is, so what are we talking about? What is the likelihood that Vermont, that makes claim of being among the first states to abolish slavery in the first place, what is the likelihood that any semblance of chattel slavery or indenture, and I'm going to be specific now with our references to Black Americans in particular, what's the likelihood that chattel slavery or indenture would be reinstated in Vermont? What does it mean? Is this vote significant, or is it performance? And if it, why do we need to do it? For whom are we doing this? Right? I don't know. I think, as I said, I'm going to vote yes, because I think it's the right thing to do. But do I have questions about the why of it? I do. Do I have questions about for whom this vote is significant? Am I nervous about the possibility of all of the possibilities that I'm nervous about? Chattel slavery is not one of them. That's not one of them, right? And are there other things that we could do in Vermont that would have much more of a demonstrable significance to African Americans who are here and here in particular, but in the United States. I don't know. But I'm interested in, if you're thinking anything about any of this, I'm interested in what you're thinking, but I'm also interested in why you came. You know, what your expectation was, what it means to be present at a moment like this. It's important to me.
If people want to put things in the chat, or if you just want to raise your hand, or I can call on you if you have something you want to say. Rabbi Amy?
Hi, Margaret. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
I've learned a lot in these last 20 minutes. I really appreciate what you've just said. And you've posed an interesting question. In fact, the Vermont Interfaith Action, of which we are a participant, and I'm a participant in the Clergy Council, is organizing a series of events to update the Vermont Constitution relative to this question that you've just raised. And so hearing you raise it as a question differently than I've heard from my colleagues is challenging to me. And I'll tell you what my immediate reaction is.
Okay.
My immediate reaction comes from my perspective as a religious leader, especially in the Jewish community, because we like to tell our stories to create our religious observances in the context of history. So our faith tradition is not just about faith, it's about peoplehood and history. And so when we tell those stories, we live through the experiences of those who came before us and take a stand about what that means for us now. And you know, in an interpretive tradition, it could mean many different things sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But when we do take that stand, it's a way of saying, who are we now? What are our values? And what are our aspirations as a people and as a human community?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and I love that you're challenging me, so please go ahead. For me, this action of seeking to change the Vermont Constitution is a way, in some ways, of recreating what we do at the Seder. We're saying, okay, here it is, we're marking it. We are telling the story. We are noticing what happened in the past and how it should happen in the future. And so for me, that felt very resonant, though I certainly hear you that what's most important is who we are becoming and what that means for our world going forward. It just felt to me like it has value in that regard. What do you think?
I'm thinking about what you're thinking. You know, I know there's no question in my mind, but that this is clearly a controversy among the small African-American population in Vermont as well. But I asked the same question to them. You know, what is this all about? You know, what do we need, and why do we need it? And I think that, I mean, I like the idea that you brought up, the example of the Seder, because I do think it's a little different, because we do that every year, right? We tell that story and do that every year and participate in that ritual. After the Constitution is changed, I'm not sure that anybody will ever think about the quote abolition of slavery again in Vermont. And so that's the end. That's the end. If there were something attached, if there were some celebration, some ritual attached, maybe. But how
Maybe we need to, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I thought you were done. I'm sorry. I was going to say maybe we need to create that together.
Oh, I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. I think that simply voting to change it, okay. But what does it mean? And how do we in Vermont consciously, what history goes along with that change? What are we trying to teach people when we make that change? And how do we continue to commemorate whatever it is we want to commemorate by making that change?
Barbara, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I have a little cold or something else, which I'll find out later today. Excuse me.
Well, I hope it's a good thing. I hope it's just a cold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I had to miss part of the presentation because the doctor called. But I just wanted to say that I just saw the proclamation that the mayor, I live in Burlington, and the mayor wants to make Juneteenth a legal holiday in Burlington, and they're going to have a really big whopping celebration. However, the mayor's committee on racial equality has largely resigned. Taisha Green, who was appointed to be the head of racial equality in Burlington, has had to resign because she was not put on a police commission that she should have been put on. So I wonder why the mayor is allowed to do this without a protest from the community, as so much window dressing. And I think that's one of the things I hear you trying to say.
Completely agree. Completely agree, because that's what it is. You know, the critical issues, the departure, the resignations, the way in which the mayor has dealt with racial injustice, racial inequity on the police force, and pushed back against everything that Taisha Green was trying to do. Do that. Don't make Juneteenth a celebration. Who cares, right? There are issues, burning issues in Chittenden County that need to be addressed with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And particularly, I mean, the complexity in Vermont is that when we say Black, it means a whole bunch of things, right? That's the complexity that I keep trying to convey, that Black in Vermont means not just, mostly means not me, not those of us who were born and bred in this country. And why that matters is that we bring a history, a shared history, and a perspective to the conversations that Black folks who were not born here don't share, more often than not, don't share. And so the way our population is so tiny, you know, and that we are often represented by voices that we have not chosen as our representative. And so there's no way in which those of us who are members of that tiny community have a collective voice in Chittenden County. We just don't. The loudest voices are the people who speak on our behalf. That does not mean that those are the folks with whom we agree in terms of their positions. So I'm with you completely that we would really appreciate something substantial change. Yes, I'm not saying we shouldn't have the celebrations. I'm saying that the noise from the celebration overshadows the real work that we need to be doing. The money that's going into the celebration overshadows the real work that we need to be doing in Vermont and in Chittenden County.
Well said. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Rabbi Amy.
Thanks. I'm wondering if you could give us a few bullet points of how you would outline the real work.
I'm going to be me. And I am, as I've said, I am a Mississippian. And I have been, in the 5 years that I've been in Vermont, I would categorize Vermont as among the most racist states that I've ever lived in. And that would be including Mississippi. But it looks different and it feels different, right? And I make a great distinction between ignorance and racism, not the same thing. There is an unknowing in relation to Black Americans because there's been a lack of exposure. And that comes to me with questions, questions about, who you are, what you do, how you ended up here, which is offensive to Black folks who were born here. But there are a series of innocent, I just want to get to know who you, F-35, sorry. I just want to get to know who you are because I've never known anyone like you before, right? And those is, from my point of view, are welcome questions. Anything that brings us together are questions that I'm willing to spend some time with and entertain. But there is many white Vermonters imagine themselves to be both liberal and progressive, right? And with that imagining comes a certain set of assumptions about what they know in relation to racism and racist practices. And so more often than not, I mean, the example Weinberger would say would not make any claim to being racist, right? He would make all claims to being liberal and progressive, but to sit down and have a conversation with a group of African Americans to say, let me tell you what's not right here, right? Let me tell you what's not right about the cops, about crime, about driving while Black, and especially the school system, what Black children endure in the Burlington schools is unconscionable. And so those are the kinds of things, those are the kinds of actions that I think, real actions that we need to take in Vermont and in Chittenden County in particular.
Thank you. Thank you.
I work really, really closely with school districts, and I listen to the children. Young adults, whatever. I listen. The stories are painful stories about how they feel in class, the things that the teachers say, the things that their classmates say, what they have to endure. It's unbelievable. And it's those kinds of things that really need to, just human stuff, the stuff that really needs to change. We need to know each other. We need to learn how to ask the appropriate questions. And this is from all communities. I well understand that, that members of the African American community can be defensive and hostile and get out of my, I know all of that, but for me, that was a long time ago. I say to the younger people, I was alive in the 70s. I've been through the Black Power movement, I know all of that. It didn't work then. It was a beautiful moment. We thought it was going to last forever. Obviously, it didn't work because this is where we are. So we need a new strategy. And from my point of view, that strategy is people with good intentions and good hearts that are willing to do hard work that puts them in jeopardy. You cannot do this and not be in jeopardy. and not be criticized. In some cases, not lose a job. You have to be willing to put yourself on the line for justice. And there are not a whole lot of people. I think that's the distinction now. When I think about the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, that people recognize the fact that bad things were going to happen to them because they stood up for justice, that they were going to go to jail, that they were going to, and the list is endless. And I might point out, right, that Jews have always been intimately involved in civil rights, have always stood side by side, right, in the major moments of struggle in the lives of African Americans. And so despite whatever tensions there are, that is the reality, that is the fact of our lives. And so to imagine a coalition of people who are willing to stand up and it's a risk. It's a risk. And there are far too few people willing now to take the risk of standing. There should have been, I'm completely agreed. When Taisha Green left, people should have been marching downtown. Like, what? Are you kidding me? But no, we just had in Winooski, our director of equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She just left. And it's like, oh, okay. That's not the kind of activism with which I am familiar. That's not activism at all. That's like, okay, well, I'm sorry she's gone. There's always a good reason. I've had it happen to me twice since I've been here, because I am committed to being me. That doesn't mean I'm always right, but I am committed to being myself and consistently fighting for social justice in all of the ways that I know how, even though they're out of step with the current ways of doing it. So there are consequences. There are consequences for people who stand.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very important point, is how big a risk can we take? Are we willing to let ourselves take?
Yeah. I mean, when we think people have died, I mean, we're talking about, I mean, in its simplest terms, people have died for the right to sit in the front of a bus. That seems nonsensical, right? But it's true. And to be able to go to the bathroom anywhere they wanted to go, or to be able to eat in any restaurant, people died for that right and that privilege. And so I think we are generally too, I don't know what it is. We are generally too nervous, too concerned about consequences. And maybe that's right. Maybe nothing matters enough anymore in that way. Maybe nothing in our contemporary culture matters enough for us to be willing to take the incredible risk that those who have gone before us have taken. Don't know.
That's a sad thought.
Very.
Yeah. Having those difficult conversations. I mean, even if I can be so bold in our synagogue, having conversations about Israel, and we have a wide range of beliefs about Israel, is scary and hard, and we're working on how to do that. Judy, did you want to say something? You're muted. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yes. As far as the Constitution and that question is concerned, it just seems to me that what that is, that there's no chance, as you said, that this is going to really make a difference, but that it's an opportunity to change something awful that's just been on the books and overlooked for all these years, and just to get it in black and white has some kind of meaning.
I completely agree. I don't disagree with you on that. What I'm doing is comparing, I guess in some sense, apples and oranges, right? It's not that it doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't mean, of course it means something, but on the scale of where we are and what we need, it's a little tiny drop. But I'm going to vote for sure. I'm going to vote in favor of it, absolutely, and I hope you will too, because it does have significance. I think we need so much more that, but I don't mean to undermine the significance at all. It needs to go. It needs to go, and I hope it will, and I think it will. Actually, I mean, Vermonters will be very good about that.
I was struck that there were, it has to pass the House and the Senate twice in 2 different sessions before we get to vote on it in November. And it did pass the Senate twice, but there were still 3 representatives who voted against it. How can you vote against it? Very scary. Yeah, and that.
That's the point, though, Nancy, right?
Exactly.
That in 2022, 3 people would vote against the abolition of the clause in the Constitution that says we can still have slavery. I mean, that's unbelievable. Why? But there is that population in Vermont, and it is far more prevalent than I think many of us know and understand. And those are the folks against whom we have a lot of work to do, a lot of pushback. I think all of our communities that they call, quote, marginalized. I think the other, I don't know if you all have ever, I know I'm going to forget the name, the minister and the rabbi. Is it Michael Eric Dyson and the rabbi? I would like, I'm being really presumptuous right here, but and I will send it to Nancy. But there was a series of conversations between an African-American minister and a rabbi about the relationships, both historical and present, between African-Americans and Jews. And when I was at St. Lawrence, there was actually in the Department of Religion, there was one of my colleagues and friends is a rabbi, and we went to great lengths to try to craft a course on Blacks and Jews. And so it never happened because we both retired. But the syllabus for the course is amazing. The books and the syllabus is actually absolutely amazing. And I think it's a course that's still worth teaching somewhere. And there are conversations that are worth having. I did participate early on in the BRIC. I don't remember what rabbi, I think he was there. I don't remember exactly what we called it, but it was going in the celebration. Stopping Stone. Yeah, I participated in several of those conversations, and I had hoped that perhaps we would be able to have some continuing conversations, because it's a super important. I believe that there is room and necessity for dialogue, interaction, meaningful relationships between and among all communities that are marginalized. in all communities that have been historically persecuted, oppressed, and eradicated, right? So that it would be both fruitful, but it would also be helpful for those of us who are interested in working toward justice, even in our small place, because we come together with a common interest, a history of oppression, a history of marginalization, and a commitment to the eradication of racism and anti-Semitism and all of the isms. And that's powerful. Coalitions are powerful.
I agree. Wayne, is there something you wanted to say?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for being here with us today. You've brought up so many things that I'm going to be able to think about and go over, and after this is over. I did want to go back to near the start of what you were talking about. Was really interesting also about Juneteenth. And I just wanted to ask you, it's a national holiday now, but whose holiday is it?
Yeah, well, I wish I knew. I think, it's certainly billed as an African-American holiday and a celebration, obviously, of the emancipation after emancipation of a group of people. I don't know, Wayne, I don't know. When I'm trying to sort of sort out what it means to me. I certainly understand, fully emotionally and intellectually what it meant to those people, but I'm not sure. I think, there would have been a combination of celebration and what the hell, what you mean? How did this happen? How did we not get in on this?
Yeah.
When everybody else did? So I don't know. I've watched a lot of sort of celebratory programs and documentaries about it, just trying to figure it out. But certainly my friends who are younger than I and contemporary, and especially, I think in Vermont, any opportunity to celebrate Black culture is an opportunity, because there's that the opportunities are few, right? Yeah. That gives us visibility. We can talk about history, we can talk about our culture, we can celebrate all of that. So part of that is context. Though right. There's celebrations all over the country. Here, as I said, we so seldom get to have center stage in any kind of positive way, that I think that's one of the reasons that it's, that's all we're talking about now.
Yeah.
That's all we've been talking about for weeks. And that's okay. But I think your question is a great question. Thanks. We are largely invisible here, unless it's something not pleasant, right? We are largely invisible here. And so this gives us specifically, and I think, again, it relates to the point I raised with the various Black populations here. This is a celebration that specifically celebrates Black Americans. And that is a culture that is not attended to in Vermont. It just isn't.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, I think it's great that it's our moment to say, we're here too. Hey, we're here too. We're not immigrants, but we present a set of problems that maybe other folks don't. We have this complex history, really complex. The perspective is different. Our demands are different. our requests are different. And so the conversations are uncomfortable, far more uncomfortable than they would be with the various refugee populations. Because with that, there's always an element of gratitude that we don't have. Right? You know, no, thank you. I'm not grateful. Right? There's no gratitude in my story for what America did
Right.
for me. And that's a huge distinction.
Good point.
Any other thoughts or comments people want to make?
Well, if not, let me add my thanks to you for bringing a lot of food for thought, and particularly for pinpointing the specific Vermont issues. It's been eye-opening, and I hope that we can move forward in a better way
I
in
think you
Vermont and
also
in the
want-
country. Yeah,
Yep, thank you. You didn't
Thank you
have to
so
do
much.
this.
thank you,
You
thank
didn't
you
have
so
to
much.
do it.
I have
And
a-
I'm grateful that you came. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
grateful.
I really
that you
appreciate
came.
you sharing that. I had a couple questions. One, I know Michael Shaw was also involved in Stopping Stones. I don't see him here, but I know he has also mentioned wishing the conversations would continue, that the coalition
Yeah.
that created stuff. And do you have any suggestions? I mean, he was going to reach out to Pastor Arnold Thomas,
Bro-
but if there's other
Yeah.
suggestions you have of how to get that launched again.
I mean, let's think about it together.
Okay.
Right? I think it was informative, and it was compelling, and it was, from my perspective, I was deeply moved by the gesture, right? It meant something to
Mhm.
me, that it mattered.
Mhm.
And I think that not enough of us knew about it and understood and were part of the conversations, that, you know, and to understand what happened, and the origin of it, and the connection between us and you,
Mhm.
and the meaning of that. I don't think enough of us had an opportunity to talk about it, and to understand it, and to share it.
Mhm. Great. So there's definitely space to relaunch and expand who might be there.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. And I'm going to send you
yeah.
the link to I can't, the rabbi and the black
Okay,
preacher.
that's all right. Well, I know we're just about out of time, but I have questions about two books that I have gotten, and I tried to find somebody to help us learn and read about these books. And the people I asked said, "Oh no, this is too hard." But maybe one is called The Price of Whiteness, and the subtitle is Jews, Race, and American Identity. It's by Eric Goldstein, and I thought this would be really good for us to study. And the other was Black Power, Jewish Politics by Mark Dollinger, Reinventing the Alliance in the 1960s. So it's about a very specific time of Jewish-Black relations. And I thought this would be so cool for our synagogue to discuss together with folks from the African-American community possibly. And I just wondered your thoughts, or if you know those books.
I mean, no, I don't, but I can say this, that those conversations would be super, super difficult, and everybody would have to toughen up, come in ready to talk about really hard stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard stuff. I mean, I think that we could start with some films. That makes it easier, right? But what I want to say that we have had certainly within the context of my lifetime, a love-hate relationship, and it's the narrative, and shut me up. The narrative is about groups. You know, we get into this who has been more oppressed, which is nonsense, right? Oppression is oppression, right? So, right? And then, but then we get it. It gets caught up in the American dream. That's the fact of the matter. Jews made it. This is the at its base, right? The most crass expression. Jews made it and we didn't. And the reason we didn't is because they have exploited us in inner city America. That's the bottom line, right? That's a conversation that needs to be had. We need to fix that. We need to fix it. And make the strength, our strength is in our shared histories and our shared suffering.
You said it right there. Yeah. Well, I really look forward to further conversations with you and others. I think this is a good start, a good opening the door to say, let's do it. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's
Thank you so much
Good.
for coming, everybody. I
Oh,
appreciate it. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
thank you. And just before we go, I would just like to tell you all to just keep an eye out at, for the Voice and other synagogue communications to see about the future of the Lunch and Learn program. We'll see what's coming up, what the possibilities might be for next season. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Margaret, for your great
And thanks
questions.
for coming during this whole pandemic season of Lunch and Learn without lunch.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Barbara, go to Marvin.
Hope you feel better, Barbara McGrew.
Thanks. We had quite a time in California. A lot of the wedding party, even though it was outdoors, got COVID. Fred tested positive. He seems to be over whatever he had. I tested negative, but I seem to have something, and I'm going to get a PCR test at Fanny Allen this afternoon.
Yeah.
That's the update.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Judy.
Bye, everyone.